Hey, it's Josiah. On today's episode, I talked to Amelia Schafer, a journalist for the Rapid City Journal and a friend of mine from college. If you recall, Amelia was on the show around this time last year to discuss some of the reporting she was doing on the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota for the Rapid City Journal in partnership with Indian Country Today. We talked through all the particular challenges facing that community, and you can find a link to that previous episode in the show notes. This time round, Amelia is coming back to talk about an investigative piece she published on a Catholic boarding school in South Dakota and a mass grave that was uncovered there last year. We discuss the history of American Indian boarding schools and their legacy, as well as how difficult it can be to find any records of these schools. And hey, speaking of the difficulties around finding these records, I want to say at the top here that I highly encourage you to contact the Catholic Diocese of Sioux Falls, especially if you happen to be Catholic. As we discuss in this episode, the diocese likely has records from this boarding school, but they have not responded to any requests from journalists. So, consider reaching out. Before we get right into the episode, I do need to say that you can support this show on Patreon for a mere $3 a month. You get access to several bonus episodes, as well as the occasional deleted scene from an episode, and access to the Fruitless Discord. If you're not really ready to support the show financially yet, consider leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, and hey, I might read your review at the beginning of an episode. So, there you go. All right, with that all out of the way, let's get on with the episode. You are listening to Fruitless, a podcast hosted by me, Josiah Sutton. This is episode 52, The Ready to Go Home, featuring Amelia Schafer. Welcome, everybody, to another exciting episode of Fruitless. I am joined by Amelia Schafer. Welcome back, Amelia.
Thanks. It's good to be back.
So we are talking about a investigative piece that you just put out a couple days ago, right? When did this come out?
Yeah, so it came out. I at the time was partnered with Indian Country Today, ICT News, and the Rapid City Journal. So it came out in the Rapid City Journal Friday. It came out Friday the 22nd for the Rapid City Journal, and then Monday the 25th for ICT. And it was syndicated across Lee networks on Monday as well. Yeah,
so you did an investigation into a boarding school in South Dakota. For those who are not as familiar with Amelia's coverage or whatever, she came on the show early last year, so definitely go back and check on that. She's been doing a lot of coverage of the Pine Ridge Reservation, but this isn't on Pine Ridge, if I'm correct, right?
Yeah, this is on the Crow Creek Reservation, which is in central South Dakota.
Gotcha. And so yes, it was last year that a mass grave of about 38 bodies was uncovered. And, there was a big explosion of stories like this a few years ago coming out of Canada. And I think that's where a lot of people's familiarity with this stuff has been. But this one's a bit closer to home for those who are in the U.S. So I don't know. Could you tell us a little bit about what happened here?
Yeah. So as you mentioned, I think most people, when they think about boarding schools, think about Canada, or they think about specifically the Kamloops Indian School in Canada. That kind of the discovery of 215 graves at that school is kind of what started this movement of remembering the children and kind of reckoning with both countries' past with boarding schools and day schools. And so this was something that happened in both Canada and the United States dating back over 150 years, where children were taken. It was in an effort to assimilate Native children into American culture. And there's kind of this famous quote where it's like, kill the Indian, save the man. And that came out of the Carlisle Indian School in Pennsylvania. But it was this large movement that the United States had to assimilate these kids into American culture. And they would do this by sometimes forcefully taking them from their families on reservations or even in metropolitan areas like Chicago and putting them in these schools where they would learn agricultural practices. That's what you see at the school we'll be talking about today, or kind of textiles, things like that, to kind of set them up to have a job in white American society rather than the culture that these children had grown up in. A lot of these kids, especially early on, their first language wasn't English. Their first language was their native language. And when they came to school, they didn't know English. They didn't have an English name. They were assigned one. And so these schools, there's a great map, and the Department of the Interior recently finished up a 2-part series investigating boarding schools in the United States. And we still don't know everything, but across the United States, there are all of these schools, hundreds of these schools. And one of them in South Dakota, I focused on recently because a tribal leader, Crow Creek chairman, Peter Lenkeek of the Crow Creek Sioux tribe, and they are not Crow, they are Dakota people. This is something that is commonly it's a misconception is that they're Crow, but they're not. They're Dakota. They had a water line break at the site of a former Catholic boarding school. And this was in the northern part of their reservation in a town called Stefan. And the chairman, he's very involved in his community. He often drives around in his pickup truck and he checks on them. And he's very involved in a way you don't often see with tribal leaders. And so he stumbled upon them trying to fix this water line break, and he had some time, so he thought he'd help out. They were trying to figure out the original schematic of the school because they couldn't quite pin where the break was or even where the water line went through, because in a lot of these communities, they have very poor infrastructure and very poor water infrastructure specifically. You see this a lot in South Dakota. So they go into the records from the school, and there's a campus blueprint, and it says cemetery. And this is in a part of the school where the current cemetery, which is also just as old, is not located. This is a completely separate cemetery. And at the time, it felt really strange, and they didn't think that it could be correct, but it was. It lines up perfectly with the streets that are there. And so they look at it and they're like, this is really weird. So they called off efforts on the waterline break, and they eventually were able to get a photo from the school after they there's a whole process in this, which I detail in my reporting, where they brought in a tribal historic preservation officer, and he identified 38 graves. And at the time it was 37, but it's 38 because they got a photo of the grave site, which confirmed it from some other organization in South Dakota. And this showed 38 little white crosses. And the 38th one was obscured by a tree, but that's why at the time they thought there were 37. But now we know there's 38. And then previously, about 15 years ago, they built the Crow Creek Sioux Tribal Schools, which is kind of at the same site. It's off a little bit to the west, but when they were building the facilities, they uncovered 3 child-sized caskets underneath that new facility as well. So it's 38 plus 3, which if people are familiar with Dakota history, there's the 38 plus 2, which is the when 38 Dakota men were hanged in Mankato, Minnesota. And that's another history. So that's something that people have kind of spoken to me about, is that it's really interesting that it's 38 plus 3 is because they had the original hanging of, and these are their ancestors, the Dakota 38 plus 2. So and I could get into that more, but that's kind of the rundown. And where they're at now is they're trying to identify who could these graves belong to. And the site is likely from the turn of the century, the 1800s into the 1900s. The school opened in 1887. So this is probably a very old grave site.
Gotcha. And so, to investigate this, you kind of went through, trying to speak to former students of the boarding school. Is that right? Yeah.
So there's every September 30th, there's a day called Orange Shirt Day, which is when people wear orange and remember the history of boarding schools. It started in Canada, but this has come down. This tradition of Orange Shirt Day has come into the United States now. And on that day, I was on Facebook and I saw a bunch of people posting about their history with boarding schools. So I searched up Immaculate Conception, or it's sometimes called, that's the name of the school. It's sometimes also called Stefan Indian School or something of the sort. So I looked at both, and I found a number of people that were talking about their experience at the school. So what I did is I reached out to them and I asked if they were comfortable talking about it. And I got 2 people that were. One, he was his name is Zachary King. He's from the Turtle Mountain tribe up in North Dakota. And then Susan Paulson, who is from the Fort Berthold Reservation, Mandan, Hidatsa, Arikara, also in North Dakota. And I spoke with her about her experience at the school. She went in the early 60s. And then Zachary's mother, Alta Bruce, went in the late 60s, early 70s. She graduated in 1971. So I spoke with both of them, and then from there they introduced me to some other people that had gone, and it really gave me a good look into what was happening at the school in the later years. The school went back into tribal control in 1975. So a lot of the survivors are elderly now, or they have passed on. So it was kind of difficult to find people who had gone to the school.
Yeah. Absolutely. And this is not the first grave they found, is that correct?
Yeah, they had found those 3 at the site of the new school when they were building it 15 years ago.
Gotcha. And so right now we don't know a lot, outside of just the experiences of people who are at the school and what happened with these graves. Obviously, them being separate from the main cemetery is ominous in and of itself. So why is it so hard to pinpoint exactly what happened here and who these children were?
Yeah, so I guess just to back up, so the federal boarding school era allowed for religious institutes like the Catholic Church to establish schools of their own. So there's a number of Catholic boarding schools. Some are still in operation in South Dakota. And so when Immaculate Conception closed, these records and the church itself on the reservation is also closed. So the question is, where are these records? Because the church would have these death records. They would have a record of everyone that died there, everyone that was buried there, but the church doesn't exist. So I had spoken with Marquette University, which is where the Bureau of Catholic Indian Schools items are held for the most part, not all of them, because this gets kind of messy with who controls what. And the Bureau of Catholic Indian Missions is not a government institute. That is kind of confusing because it has this official name. It's kind of like a charity of sorts. It was created by the Catholic Church, but it's not like the Bureau of Indian Affairs, which is a distinct federal organization under the Department of the Interior. This is something that I was confused about initially as well. So they have records of their own, which they shared some with me, but there's also some privacy concerns in there because some of these survivors are alive. And also what they would do is they would document all of their blood quantum percentages. And there's a really long and nuanced history there with that, where people were abusing that and using it to kind of get into some not okay situations. And so they don't show you lists of students that went there. Because that was something is I wanted a clear number of how many students went there. Because I'd previously done a story on the Rapid City Indian School, which is a federal school here that was in Rapid City that closed in around the Great Depression. And I was able to get a good count of how many students went there. The difference is I came in at the end of the kind of saga with that school where things were clearly defined. They have a good count of how many students are buried there. There might be more. There's likely more, but that's had a lot of research done on it. The Crow Creek School doesn't, and it's because they are also struggling with getting these records. So if this had to do with the government, the records would be in Kansas City. That's where the Department of the Interior records for boarding schools in South Dakota is Kansas City. So in a perfect world, this would have been a government school that I could go to Kansas City or work with the National Archives there to get.
Yeah, Freedom of Information Act, something like that. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, but it's messy because it's a church function and the church does not have to give up any records they don't want to. They're not required to. So it kind of became a situation where Marquette told me, well, the church should have it, but the church doesn't exist. So they told me the diocese should. And I live in Rapid City. And this is East River, South Dakota, so they have a separate diocese, and it's the Sioux Falls Diocese is who they would report to. I reached out to them several times. I never heard back. And then I also heard that there's like 2 universities in South Dakota, Augustana, I believe, and University of South Dakota in Vermilion that have records. And I believe the one in Vermilion is who provided the photo to the tribe. So they've had success working with them. I also was able to get a history book that a nun had written from USD, so that was great. And I'm really grateful for that, but they would not have the death records. It's really likely that it's the diocese that has it, but they're not cooperate. They didn't cooperate with me, and they're not cooperating with the tribe, which is really frustrating. The tribe would be able to get more records from Marquette than I can because they're a tribe. They're a government entity. They're an IRA government, which is a whole nother thing, but that's who the government would work with. But they're also running into this issue of they can't get records. So that's why it's so hard to figure out who's in these graves, is because no one's working with the tribe, and then no one, for the most part, worked with me. So that was really frustrating. But again, they don't have to. They don't have to give anyone anything. Yeah, there's no legal requirement. And
Mm-hmm.
if Congress were to pass the Truth and Reconciliation Act, then part of that, which obviously could get mixed around, but as it stands, part of that is that the Catholic Church would have to give up boarding school records. But until then, we're not going to see that. They really don't have to give up anything they want to. It would be really nice, especially, I don't know when it comes to tribal governments, if they have more of a legal obligation to give up records, but either way, it's just incredibly hard to get these records.
Could you say a little more about the Truth and Reconciliation Act? Because I don't know a ton about that. So this is something in the U.S. that they're trying to get passed, or
yeah. So it passed in Canada, and it passed a while ago. They've had it for a while, and that's kind of what created September 30th being National Day for Truth and Reconciliation in Canada.
Sure.
But they're trying to get it in the United States so that it would be similar, and it would be a body that would help to aim, or I guess, how do I word this? Yeah, I'm trying to. Okay, so it was, I know in like 2021 and 2022, this was introduced in 2021 specifically to Congress, but I think this has kind of been a back and forth thing where it's a bill that would help to establish a United States Commission on Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation. And what it would do is really give more power to boarding school survivors and outline different ways for people to get help for what they've been going through, especially with trauma, because it's a long process. And there are survivors who are a lot younger than the ones I interviewed who are still dealing with this. I know some schools closed much later on. I mean, there's still some schools in operation in South Dakota, but they look much different. So I guess I'm not going to lie. I also don't have a very great understanding of the Truth and Reconciliation Act.
Okay, no worries. No, I'm just curious. So, but one of the ways that the Truth and Reconciliation Act would help would be that it would force the diocese to hand over a subpoena stuff like this, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
Okay. That's cool. I mean, that would be a really important step right now because, so much of, again, at least my understanding of the residential school, boarding school kind of era is the fact that a lot of the historical documentation of it has been destroyed. And so it's like we can't even properly honor the victims oftentimes because we don't know who they are.
Yeah. Yeah. There's such a long history there with the church and with Native communities. And sometimes it's easier, and it's not every diocese that's like this. I had somebody reach out to me from Philadelphia who told me that there's a process they're supposed to go through, and apparently the Sioux Falls diocese is not doing that. And I know Philadelphia obviously is going to be a lot more different than a smaller diocese in South Dakota, but they have Carlisle. I don't know for sure, but Carlisle, which is one of the worst federally operated Indian boarding schools, that was a federal school, but they're probably more, because of the proximity of that school to the Philadelphia diocese, I'm assuming that they would have more information and be briefed on this more. And again, the Carlisle Indian School was not a religious institution whatsoever. It was 100% federally run. But if you are interested in learning about United States boarding schools, Carlisle is going to be the one that comes up the most. So I'm assuming the Philadelphia diocese have a much better education on how to deal with these things because they likely have heard about it more. Yeah,
as there seems to be more ignorance on this in the kind of Midwest area in the West, it seems, which is really unfortunate.
Yeah, I think South Dakota, since there are 9 tribes here and there's a significant Native population, I would hope that they would have more information on how to handle this within the diocese. But I know in Iowa, there were at least 3 boarding schools in Iowa. I know at least one was government operated, but I'm pretty sure there was a Catholic one. I'm not sure how educated Iowans would be on this. Obviously, if you're Meskwaki, you're going to know a lot more about this. But
right.
I don't know, the average Iowan probably doesn't even know that there's 3 schools. And I'm bringing this up because 1, I was born and raised in Iowa, and 2, I know you're located there. So it's just kind of interesting because it's like there's schools in almost every state, but how many Americans know that,
Yeah,
how many Americans realize that they could live near the site of a former boarding school?
No, there is, and I don't know if this is just because of my lack of looking for that information, but there is a real not a lot of talk about Indigenous issues in Iowa, which is unfortunate.
And it's a shame. It's a shame because you've got really good organizations there, like the Great Plains Action Society, which is out of Sioux City, and then the Meskwaki Nation in Iowa, and it's just interesting. But it's also states with no native tribes have boarding schools that kids were sent to, because they were often, what I was told by some of these survivors in North Dakota, they were sent far away, so it was less likely for them to try to run away.
Right. I mean, which is a classic, I mean, it's an ethnic cleansing tactic. Yeah. So yeah, you talked to some of the survivors of the, of the boarding schools here in South Dakota, without maybe getting, too much into it, I guess. What are the kind of abuses we see in this situation?
Yeah. So I had heard that there could be sexual abuse there, which is something that occurred frequently in these boarding schools and has been an issue that the Catholic Church has been grappling with itself. But I didn't speak with any survivors that directly experienced that, so that wasn't something I touched on in my piece. But what I did hear was a lot of what I think used to be called corporal punishment, and this was common in Catholic schools across the board. But what happened at these boarding schools is it was kind of more to the extreme because they lived there for the most part, and so. Some of the things were, one survivor told me that she was frequently locked in a separate room and would be forgotten about until 3 a.m. as a form of punishment. They would be beaten while doing chores. They would have the students beat each other. And that creates just a kind of terrorizing environment that I can't even begin to comprehend, is having students beat each other. That was something that they mentioned was, and I can't remember the exact same, I believe it was that they called it the belt line at the school. And that was where there would be 2 rows of boys and they would have their belts ready. And one boy, who was the one being punished, would run through the line and every single boy would hit him with the belt. And that was one of the forms of punishment that they used at the school. And I know from family members that went to not Indian boarding schools, but Catholic schools, that corporal punishment was part of how they kind of functioned. But this kind of took it to a different level. And I think when I spoke with survivors, they mentioned they think it's because there was this impression that the families wouldn't care, or the parents were so far away that they wouldn't know. And the kids often, like, especially with older times, there was no way for the kids to call back home initially. So they only see their families in the summer if they went home, if they could afford to go home. So it kind of created this environment of, like, the kids to a degree probably thought that this was normal, which is something that is just disgusting to think about. But it created this environment of normalcy for them. And that's something that something that I've done some other reporting on is there was a lot of generational trauma came out of these schools. And that I mean, it affected the way that Native families operate. And especially since you weren't raised by your parents, you were raised by a school or a Catholic nun, you don't have a view on what parenting looks like. And that kind of affects the way that families are for generations after. It broke the traditional, I can't think of the word, it broke the traditional kind of ideas on parenting and on culture, and introduced things that, like, a lot of people that I've spoken to have said that before assimilation, we didn't have homophobia, or we didn't have domestic violence, which is a huge issue in South Dakota. Domestic violence is. And so it kind of broke traditional cycles and created something different and something that is still being dealt with today, which is, I mean, there's a lot of different education and things that go into this. And I know that recently, which is good, Medicaid is starting to sponsor different Native ideas on healing, like sweat lodges and song and things like that. And so there's things that are being implemented to help heal, but the boarding schools and this boarding school era really impacted not just the people that went there, but the generations to come. Is what I'm trying to get at. I apologize. That was a really long-winded explanation.
I think that's helpful to look at, because it's not just the abuse, which is already horrific as it is, but it's when it's built into this assimilation process. It fucks with the culture. It fucks with what becomes normal behavior, and has a long-term generational impact. That's really horrifying.
Yeah, and it's something it's brought up a lot when I interview people. So I guess some background for people that might not be familiar. I'm an Indigenous Affairs reporter. I used to be partnered with both the Rapid City Journal and ICT, but currently I'm just the Rapid City Journal. I'm no longer a shared reporter, a contract reporter. I'm officially just full-time with the Journal. So something I've found over my year and a half of reporting in South Dakota is whenever I'm dealing with a story that involves trauma, boarding schools and the generational trauma from that are always brought up. This this past year, we had some issues with the Rapid City Area School District, which there was this big civil rights report that came out from the United States, and it exposed discrimination within the school district and some comments that were allegedly made by the former superintendent. And really something that was brought up a lot to me is boarding schools kind of broke perceptions on schooling and created mistrust with schools, and it continues today. And things like, this is always brought up, addiction. People say that this is a consequence of boarding schools. It's everything. Somebody once told me, and I really wish I could remember who told me this, everything leads back to boarding schools. It all leads back to that. It leads back to the stripping of culture, the stripping of language, the stripping of identity. I mean, these children had their hair cut. They were assigned a name that was not their name, and their whole identity was taken from them. They were beaten for speaking their language. They were penalized for practicing their culture, and it just completely warped the way that we are today.
Yeah, and I mean, that makes a lot of sense in that, you know, a boarding school, like you would be going to that in really important developmental years of your life. So in a lot of ways, yeah, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say it all goes back to that, because that becomes the defining developmental moments of these people's lives. In the beginning, God, it's so fucked up.
Yeah, it's a lot, and it really warped people's perceptions, and it warped the generations to come, and it's just devastating to think about that. It's devastating to think about not just the loss of language, but the loss of identity and the loss of culture that came from that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
But what was really, I want to, on a more positive note, I got to, on November 9th, go to a ceremony at the school. And afterwards, there was this big discussion with community members and elders who came out, and they shared, one, their experience at schools, but two, Susan Paulson, one of the people I interviewed, her daughter, Jennifer Youngbear, had come along for the trip, and she gave this really powerful speech about how we were beaten down and we were broken, but we aren't broke, if that makes sense. And I really wish I didn't record any of it, because it was kind of part of ceremony, but it wasn't. But she just gave this really powerful talk on how resilient we are and how we remain. And I mean, her mom is a good example of that. Her mom and herself work in Bismarck on helping to educate on generational trauma, and they've done a lot of amazing work. And it's really powerful, just the work that they have done themselves. And that might be something I follow up on in the future. I had discussions with them about it, and I wanted to include it, but she said it's not about her, you know.
Yeah.
So she didn't want it in there, but I do want to plug how amazing she is and what amazing work she does in the Bismarck area for the schools and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's always an important thing, because as we focus on this really dark chapter, I think it's easy to to start to relegate Indigenous people to the past tense. Like when I had you on last time, I titled that episode, you know, Indian country in present tense, because I was trying to emphasize this tendency that, like, you know, white European descended Americans have of thinking about Native Americans as people that were here in the past. And that's not the case. There's a resilience. And it's really important to underline that, I think.
Yeah. And it's what's really interesting, I mean, with my own personal experience. So the past couple years, my family and I have been reconnecting with our culture and with our tribal communities and things like that. But when I was growing up, I didn't know about the Meskwaki Nation in Iowa until I was in college. I think I was like 17, and I was working on something I used to work at the college marketing department, and I was doing something there, and I stumbled upon the Meskwaki Nation. It just took me aback. So I'm like, I didn't know there was a tribe in Iowa, and I don't think a lot of Iowans know that.
No, really unfortunate is I think most Iowans only know the word Meskwaki because there is a casino named Meskwaki.
Yep. Yeah, it's a pretty nice casino, not gonna lie. I did a story on an MMIW case there, and they have this really beautiful little display in part of the casino for her, Rita Papaki, who's a missing Indigenous woman who's been missing since I want to say 2015 in Iowa. And for my capstone at Simpson, I did a story on her, and that's something I need to follow up on. But the Meskwaki Nation is just fascinating, because it's also, I guess this is kind of completely detracting from it, but it's not a reservation, it's a settlement, because they were, so there's the Sac and Fox tribe of Kansas and Oklahoma, I think. and that's also Meskwaki, but they were like separated, and then these Meskwaki bought back the land in Iowa. So that's why it's a settlement. It's not a reservation, and that itself is really fascinating.
That is really interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
just,
my ignorance on this is pretty apparent too, because I was kind of saying that the Meskwaki casino thing, I was kind of saying that in like a sad way, because I didn't realize that it was even actually it was run. It was
tribally run.
That's very cool. That's a relief. I was being like, oh, cool. The only way we remember it is some like appropriated.
Oh, no.
Casino.
It's tribally run, and they have some really cool. They've got language revitalization stuff going on there. They've got
sick.
Agriculture. Huh. They've got there. I haven't been to their tribal museum, but one of my friends here in Rapid went, and she like posted pictures, and it looks really cool. So if anybody's in the Tama era, if anybody is near Tama or in Iowa and wants to check it out, I highly recommend checking out the Meskwaki Nation.
Yeah, it was really
that
cool.
That story was just something that Rita's story, that was like my first big story I did for Native communities. I did a couple otherwise, but that one, it was just this is completely detracting from this episode. I apologize, but
no, it's okay.
It was really cool because it's like there had been a previous article that an Iowan newspaper had done, and I won't name them, but or it was a TV outlet or something. I don't know. Anyway, I'm sure if somebody wants to dig it up, they can find it. But it had painted her in a really negative light as being an addict. And she did struggle with things like that, but that's not who she was. And that really, you see this, it's a perfect example of how normal outlets report on missing Indigenous people. And I think it's gotten a lot better since 2015, 2016. But I had to go in person and meet with the chairman and build trust with them to tell this story and to meet her mother, because of how the Iowa outlets had at the time, and they've gotten better, kind of worked the story to be, oh, this is just another missing Native woman. This is just a missing Native woman. This is a missing woman with a substance issue, yada, yada. And not, this is a missing mother. This is a missing community member. She was such a huge part of their community and such like a wonderful person. And she was painted in this light because of something that she had struggled with in the past. So
that's really
it's interesting. And I guess I will tie this back. This is something I wanted to say is a lot of the time people do stories on Native communities when it's something depressing like this, but there is so much like good and other things happening in these communities. And that's something that I hope is highlighted more in the future, and that I think about a lot in my coverage. Yeah.
And actually, I mean, honestly, if you have like a really more positive piece at some point that you want to reach out to me and we do another episode about, please do, because I don't want to fall into this problem as well. You know, every time I'm talking about Indigenous issues on this show, it's depressing shit. And it is a present tense community that is doing stuff now. Yes.
And it's really interesting. It's like I've done all these stories, and one of them that was positive, actually, like you don't often see this, but it did really well. It was about an award-winning quilter who opened up a fabric store and quilt shop here in Rapid City, and it was just good to see that people really tuning into stories of good and positive things happening in Native communities. And I see this sometimes when I do stories on entrepreneurs, especially women, Lakota women who are entrepreneurs, is sometimes people really will tune in on this. So I guess for news organizations, it's not that people don't care about these positive stories. They do. They do. They also care about, obviously, negative things that we need to talk about. That's still important to talk about. But I think it's also really important that we highlight the good that's happening.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, just to cover everything, you know? Which is what, I don't know. That's what the courtesy we offer other communities. And it's unfortunate we don't tend to offer it to Indigenous ones. Yeah, well, you also had sent me the reporter's notebook kind of thing you did, and do you want to talk? So this was a bit of a personal piece for you on some level.
It was it's my first op-ed that I've done since I worked for the student newspaper at Simpson, so it's been a while.
That's great.
So I was asked by my editor at the Rapid City Journal, Mike Brownlee, if I could do something on kind of my experience reporting on it, and so I reflected on it and I thought about it a lot, and I did this story on the process of kind of when you do investigative pieces like this, and this isn't, so I worked on this for about 5 or 6 months, and in an investigative story, that's not actually that long. That's kind of short.
Sure.
I've had stuff that I've been working on I just got a FOIA back that I sent 2 years ago. So this is a shorter story. Yeah. And that was to the government. So of course that's going to take a really long time.
Sure.
this was on the shorter scale. Kind of a glimpse into that, because this doesn't seem like a short story, like a short timeline, I mean, but in terms of investigative work, it is. So
Gotcha.
while I was working on this, I thought a lot about my own family's history. I found that we had relatives that went to, so actually Dartmouth, which I didn't know, Dartmouth has roots in being an Indian day school. And this is a very long time ago, like late 1700s, no joke, before the federal boarding school era. So this predates that. And you see this a lot on the East Coast, like the Brotherton Indian Reservation in New Jersey and things like that. Like, I think that was the first ever reservation in the United States. I'm getting sidetracked, but the point is, this made me reflect on my own family's history. My mom and my aunts went to a Catholic school in New Jersey, and it was a normal Catholic school. But just some of the things they shared with me, I thought about a lot when I was talking to these survivors. The corporal punishment and things like that they had endured or seen other students endure. And my mom, it kind of phased out by the time my mom got there, but for her older sisters, this was something they witnessed a lot more. And I don't want to speak too much. I didn't include that in my piece because I don't want to speak too much to their experiences. And I don't want to talk about that too much, but it was something I thought about. And it was something that when these women were speaking with me and when Zachary talked with me about his mom, I thought a lot about my own family. And I don't have a great understanding of all the schools that my family went to or the history there. But whenever I do stories on boarding schools, I think about it. And so while a good portion of the story, and I could have gotten into it more, was me trying to get these records, and I have some lighthearted quips in there about me not being able to read old cursive and needing my dad to help me with it. But it's just really, the reporter's notebook is a glimpse into the process behind working on the school. And what was really special is when I had spoken with the Chairman Lenkeek, who I can't sing his praises enough. He's been great to work with on really any story that I need a tribal chairman or tribal leader to comment on. He had told me that when you do work like this, it sits with you. So there were things that I also did to take care of myself that I didn't include, like traditional spiritual things, but like smudging off and just things like that. But stories like this they're tough, and I'm definitely taking some downtime before I do another big investigative piece. But really, this is something that I'm really proud of, and I'm really relieved to be done with. And there's ways that it could have been different. There's things that I left out, and like people saying there was sexual abuse happening, but obviously I didn't have anyone that could speak to that. So right. But I don't want to say it didn't happen, but I didn't have anyone that directly spoke to it. And it's just a suspicion at this point. Suspicion, yeah. So I kind of, in the reporter's notebook, I first start out with detailing how I found out about it. And kind of after that, I immediately launched into it. It was writing. So I had to backtrack. In late July or mid-July, the United States Department of the Interior released their final report on boarding schools. And so for ICT, we were working on this big piece, and I contributed to it by getting an interview with Chairman Lenkeek. And I asked, well, what do you think of this? He told me what he thought of it. And really what he thought was, this is good, but isn't enough. And in that, he brought up that they had their own issue at the school. So then I went into sending different FOIAs, reaching out to places about trying to get records, which I did. And it taught me a lot, honestly. This is also something I didn't really get into, but I could have, about the importance of public libraries, because I did not know, like they told me there's this big microfilm reel, which I had never used before. And I used it to look at the things I got from Marquette, and they helped me with it. But they told me the police will go in there frequently to look at cold case records. So it kind of, this story also highlighted to me the great importance that public libraries play in the city that they're in and things like that, because I did not realize how important the library was to the police or how important it would be to myself. All of my FOIAs came through the library because they kind of happened as interlibrary loans, which was also really interesting. And there's more that I could have got on the school, but the South Dakota Historical Society wasn't able to send me anything because they're going through some big construction effort right now. So that would have come through the library, but I went to the library, I don't know how many times, and they've got the Rapid City Public Library has this beautiful local history room, and that's where the microfilm machine is, and I got to sit in there, and it just made me feel really cool. I felt really cool getting to use this microfilm reel and getting to.
I love microfilm.
Yeah,
I did history in college, so I got to do that a handful of times. I love it. Yeah, it's so fun.
It was really fun because when I'd done my genealogical research a couple years back when I was really reconnecting and stuff, it's an ongoing process, but like the initial stages, I had looked at microfilm online. So I got to like hold physical microfilm, and it was like holding a baby because I was so scared of like smudging it or dropping it or like rewinding it wrong. And it was just like, it was so cool to get to explore the library as part of this. That was something that I really enjoyed. And then what happened was I after that, I had to return all my stuff around like October 15th or October 30th is when it was due back. So, which isn't normal in a FOIA, but when you're working with an interlibrary loan, it's a bit different.
Right.
Because these weren't true FOIAs. Because in a true FOIA, I would have the documents for like ever. It wouldn't be temporary, but one of the documents I used obviously was microfilm. And then the other one was this dissertation written by a former nun in 1965. So 10 years before the school closed. And so after I finished reading those, I went about Orange Shirt Day was like around that time. So I had reached out to people, and then I finished reading, and then I did my interviews, and then I spoke with Chairman Lenkeek, and we were supposed to initially have the ceremony in September for the gravesite, but then it kept getting pushed back, and it ended up being November 9th, which worked perfectly because I reached out and I invited Susan Paulson, and I reached out to Zachary King too, but he wasn't able to come because obviously it was kind of short notice. And so Susan also brought her friend Roberta, who went to the school with her, and her daughter. And she told me that that she wouldn't have come if she wasn't invited because it's like traditional for their culture to not go unless you're invited. And I had checked with the chairman first if it was okay, because I didn't know how big of a thing this was. And it was pretty small. It was an intimate gathering. But I also apologize. I'm rambling so much. I'm better at putting things into words because I can on paper or on the computer because I can edit it and
no.
So stop me if I'm like word vomiting.
No, I appreciate what you're saying though. So it's totally fine.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I invited her and we met up at the tribal casino for breakfast, and it was really good to get to meet them in person. And just to get to sit there, but I could tell, which is something I say in the piece, I could tell we were all nervous. I like ordered this big breakfast and then I didn't eat any of it. Because one, it's really hard as a reporter trying to take notes while eating. Cause sometimes I'll like meet with people over coffee or meet with people over like brunch or something. And it's like trying to take notes while eating is super awkward. So I have to like wait for a gap to take a sip of coffee or to take a bite of something. And then on top of that, I was really nervous because, I don't know. There was so much writing on this and I was so excited to finally get to go there and finally get to be a part of this that it was like, I don't know. It was just this whole thing. And they talked to me more. That's where they told me about the Beltline and some other stuff that had happened and how some of the abuse that they had endured. And then right after that, we ran out of time. So we drove up to the school, and the school itself is kind of, I had seen it so much in this dissertation I read. There were all of these like photos. And what was really special about it is this nun had like printed the photos out and glued them to the pages. So when you're flipping through this dissertation, and another reason why I couldn't keep it is because it's a historical piece that in its raw form that had to be returned.
It's got the physical pictures.
It had the physical printed out pictures glued on. It was so special. And just I did take some pictures of the pictures and I have those in my piece, but it was like I'd seen all these pictures. I'd seen the school initially when it was opened, the first pictures of it, and then I'd seen it in the 60s when Susan would have gone and Roberta would have gone, and then I got to stand there, and it was just kind of eerie. And I'm not Catholic. I was raised Baptist, so I was also super confused with some of these random statues that were just kind of sitting out on the side of the road out front of the school. And my partner, Evan, he was raised Catholic. So I had to send some pictures of them to him. And I was like, what is this? And one of them was the Infant of Prague, Prague.
Oh, Prague. Yeah.
Prague. Yeah. And I wasn't super familiar with, but it used to hang above their auditorium. And then the school, I don't know how many tornadoes. I counted them all. It was hit by tornadoes a lot. It set on fire a lot. There were a lot of blizzards. And I'm assuming the auditorium at some point crumbled in that. And so they just have this statue on the side of the road now. So it was really creepy and kind of eerie. And just standing there, I had all these emotions, and it was just so weird finally being there after I had been researching it since July. And then in November, I'm standing there and I'm looking at it and I'm just feeling all of these mixed emotions, and just, it was just so weird being there. And I walked around a bit and everything's abandoned and there's trees growing in the old room, not room, the old staff building, I think.
Yeah.
And the church is mostly intact, and then the old school building has trees growing out of it as well. And there was randomly an old TV just sitting in front of it. So all of this was just super eerie and super creepy. And it was raining, and it was just, I can't really describe how I felt standing there, but I felt weird. Just weird, just being there and thinking about, what did these kids go through? What happened at this school that we've got? One, the original gravesite, which is where the chief that kind of started the school is buried. And then two, we've got this hidden gravesite, and it's like, we don't know who these kids are. We don't know where they're from. They could be from Fort Berthold, like these two women I had spoken to, or they could be local. Their families could just be across the street because there's houses there. And it's just, it was just so weird being there. I can't begin to describe it.
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like an area that would just feel very haunted. You know what I mean? I don't mean that necessarily in a literal sense, but
that is something that they say though. Is
yeah,
because
the statues move is what some folks were saying.
They've said that the statues move, and then like kids. So what happened is the Crow Creek Tribal School next door is a boarding school, but it's BIE, Bureau of Indian Affairs run, kind of, but mostly tribal run. So it's a lot different, and it's a lot more supportive, and they teach culture and they teach language, and so it's a lot different than what the school is. But the kids that live there have said that they've seen the statues move, or that they've seen weird things happen at the school. And something I didn't include in either piece is the chairman told me that so where the gravesite is kind of private property. And there's these, I can't think of it. There's these like houses, I can't think of the name for them, but they're like smaller houses where tribal members live. And they have said that the kids will visit them in their homes that are in the cemetery, and that it's been happening a lot lately. And that was part of the reason we gathered there, was to help them, I don't know how to put it, kind of rest or move on in a way. And I will say, for those who are kind of wondering why I'm kind of dancing around this, you can't describe what happens in a ceremony. It is very inappropriate to take photos of a ceremony, take video or audio or any type of recording. And obviously some people do it, but it is frowned upon and it is not right. So I can't describe what we did in the ceremony, but I will say it was for the purpose of helping the children that are still there and helping them go home, like their spirits. Because their spirits had apparently been visiting tribal members, and it's not like an ghost kind of thing like you think about now, in a modern sense as we think about this, and it's like, spooky Halloween. It's more like, it's like they were visiting them in ways, and just the kids were telling the community members that they were ready to go home. So that was what we had just done. And then I went to the school, and in a way, standing there was a relief. And I put tobacco down, which is another like cultural thing that we do. And it was just so creepy being there.
Yeah. You know, that there's kind of a theme to this. You saying you're not wanting to describe the ceremony as much, and whatever theme with like not, there being a limit of what should be shown. Because I know you made the decision not to include some images in the piece, right? Could you say a little bit about that?
Oh yeah, of course. So I did take a picture before we did the ceremony of it's a fenced in little area behind some houses. And that's where they found the graves. And it's kind of next to this tree line and everything. And I just had thoughts, since I described the location of it roughly, that was enough. Because so dialing back the area, some history on the Crow Creek Sioux tribe. So initially the land they're on was, it belonged to the Arikara people. And the Arikara people are now in North Dakota. That's actually where Susan is. She's Mandan Hidatsa Arikara. I can't for the life of me remember. She did tell me. I can't remember which tribe she's from, or if it is all three, but they're the three affiliated tribes. If you learn more about oil fields in the Brecking or whatever it is, oil field in North Dakota, you're going to hear a lot about them. But anyway,
sure.
They were the original inhabitants of this land. And a really, really, really long time ago, there had been a massacre, which is the Crow Creek massacre site. And it was these Arikara people were killed by a rival tribe, and they were slaughtered by the masses. It is a massive gravesite. It's really interesting. And they were buried in this big mass grave with their dogs. And it was discovered, I want to say in like around the 70s or 80s. It's near the Missouri River on the reservation. And right after it was discovered, it was hit by grave robbers. And that's something you'll see a lot. So in where I grew up in Hardin County, Iowa, there's the Fulker Mound Group. I can't for the life of me remember. And I did a story for it with the Times Citizen a couple years ago, if anybody's interested. But these tribes a very, very, very long time ago that were in the area, whose descendants are still here today, had made these mounds. And then when the mound group was discovered in Hardin County, grave robbers hit it. And there are no bones in these mounds. It's a conical mound to kind of graph the shape of whatever celestial thing was happening at the time. And this is something you'll see a lot with really old mounds. But there's this big hole in it where people had dug to try and steal pottery or bones or anything. Because you'll see this a lot with Indigenous people is, for some reason, people want to go and they want to steal bones or they want to steal artifacts and they want to sell it and they want to make money off of it or they want to put it in a museum. And that's a whole separate issue that we could do a whole other episode on if you're interested. But the last thing I want is for these graves to be robbed or to have non-natives or anyone come out and want to look at these graves or mess with these graves or do anything to it that could jeopardize the tribe, because the chairman worked with me on this and they have a lot of trust in me, and I don't want to violate that trust by letting it. And I could be being hyper like paranoid about this, but the last thing I want is someone to disturb these children's graves. They've already been through so much that I'm like, I don't think the photo was necessary. I had already had so many other photos, and I'm just like, I thought about it a lot, and I originally had the photo in the asset, and I just removed it because I thought, well, you know what? I described the general location, and it's like, it's private property. I don't want people, one, messing with the graves, but two, messing with the people that live there, because this is like their average, this is just where they live. Like, that's their house. So yeah, that was a decision that I thought about a lot, because I know someone else has done a story on it and from the ceremony, and she did include a photo of the area, which is fine, but she also didn't do an in-depth story like I did where it's described in detail. And again, the last thing I want is people to mess with, one, the graves, and two, the people that just live there.
Yeah. Well, and I think the choice of images you did keep, it actually adds a bit more to the impact, I think, than if it showed things. I think the the kind of eroded Virgin Mary statue and the kind of just the Immaculate Conception Church sign and stuff like that are they invoke the emotions that are necessary without being exploitative in any way. You know what I mean?
Yeah, the Virgin Mary statue itself, and that was probably my favorite image that I took, it's so weird to me because it's, like you said, it's eroded, and it's like, it almost looks like you could peel off the layers of it and see her face better. And it's just, to me, it's like, I don't know how old it is, but I suspect it's been at the school for a very long time, almost as long as these graves likely. And so to me, it was just a representation of not only time, but kind of like the erosion of the original, I guess, desire for the school. Because the chief who had started it, and back to that, so the Crow Creek Sioux tribe, they're Hunkpati Dakota people who had been moved around. And the Crow Creek Reservation was what originally I've heard people describe it as kind of a concentration camp of sorts for Indigenous people. They moved the Arikara out, and then the government forced Dakota people out of Minnesota, their original homelands, and northern Iowa, like very northern Iowa. And they put them and some other tribes into what is now Crow Creek. Those tribes eventually moved on and are now on other reservations, but the Crow Creek remain, and they're really, if people know, and it's like, ooh, richest tribe in America, the Shakopee Sioux tribe of they're right outside Minneapolis, throw a great powwow every year, one of my favorites. They're very closely related, but they got to stay. And the Crow Creek, Hunkpati Dakota, or sometimes they're called Yanktonai, they were moved and they remain. They're the tribe that remained on that area. So one of their band leaders or chiefs, Drifting Goose, had reached out to the Black Robes about starting a school there because, and this happened also with the Holy Rosary, now Mapialuta School on Pine Ridge, is it was seen as a good way to have an education. And these Catholic people would be willing to come and they would be willing to provide a school. And then it just kind of became this distorted thing of what it was supposed to be, of what it was originally supposed to be. It was supposed to be a place for them to learn and grow and get skills they need to survive in white culture. And instead it was being forced into American culture and being stripped of their identities. And it was just kind of a distortion of what it was supposed to be. And so to me, that's this photo of the Virgin Mary it's a distortion of what she is or who she is. And she's become that way at this school. And that's to me a representation of the boarding school era. It's a distortion of what it was supposed to be. It's this eroding, crumbling, kind of off-putting and gross version of this beautiful or supposed to be beautiful thing.
Yeah, I think that's, one thing to clarify for people listening, black robes was the term that they were using to refer to missionaries, right?
Oh, yeah.
Just to clarify.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, the black robes were like the missionaries.
No, yeah, just to clarify in case somebody, didn't know that. But no, I think that comparison is really, really apt to it, because that was a detail of the story I found particularly haunting, was that the missionaries were invited on in the first place. And that's something that just I find really painful to hear, is that there was an attempt at kind of a cooperation in an educational system here. It wasn't intended to become what it did become, but what white colonialism in this country tends to do that, huh?
Yeah.
Anyway, it's really tragic, and this obviously we're still dealing with this legacy here and still trying to learn more. And so, as we're moving toward wrapping up, I do want to say, because I know that there's a good chunk of people who listen to the show that are kind of in like the left wing Christian bent. And because of that, I mean, this is these stories are the uncomfortable stories to hear about if you're somebody that's trying to reconcile Christianity with like decolonial thought or whatever. And one little thing I think that people could do is, if you are a Catholic specifically, see what you can do to reach out to the, which diocese was it again?
Sioux Falls. And
Sioux Falls.
So if it was in Rapid City, I could have gone there in person, but it gets, South Dakota is a really big state. Sioux Falls is about 5 hours away from here. So I had traveled to Crow Creek, so I didn't know if it would be beneficial. Even they could turn me away or tell me no if I went all the way to Sioux Falls. And so, South Dakota is split down the middle by the Missouri River. So this is east. You'll hear it if you speak to someone from South Dakota. East River, West River. I live West River. This school and the diocese are East River. or diocese, pardon me. Again, not Catholic. So some of this story was really difficult for me to do because there were terms I would have to look up or whatever. Anyway, yes, it would be the Sioux Falls diocese.
So I just encourage, if anybody has any, I don't know, connections or anything related to that diocese, or even just as a Catholic are able to write to the diocese, let's get these records out here. We if you're somebody that is concerned with social justice and is a Catholic, this is one of the small things that you could do. So, on top of that, last time you were on, you had me throw a few charities in the show notes. Would you like me to share the same ones or some different ones that people can donate to help out with everything we've been talking about today?
So I'm no longer with ICT News, but you can donate directly to them. They're doing a fundraising campaign now. It's a nonprofit news source. And if you go to ictnews.org, in the top right corner, there's a donate option to help support this kind of journalism, this nonprofit journalism. You could also, these aren't charities, but you could also subscribe to the Rapid City Journal. $1 for 3 months. That's where I'll be. I'm sorry, everyone that read me at ICT, but you will now need to subscribe. So I will plug that. And then additionally, I believe you could reach out to different representatives to support the Truth and Healing Commission on Indian Boarding Schools Policies Act. You could reach out to different representatives like that. And then I can send you other charities as well.
Fantastic.
Or places to donate.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm really grateful to come on here and yap for a long period of time about my work. I'm just really excited to be able to talk about it.
Of course, yeah. We'll definitely we'll have to make this a yearly thing now, since it was November last year. We'll make a little
was that
tradition.
I can't remember. Was I talking about Nome? And then, what was funny is like 2 months later, she started getting banned, and now she's banned from every tribe in the state. Because I think the last time I was on here, I had talked about Nome, and then literally 2 months later, she did the whole cartels on reservations thing, which is an ongoing debacle. And then she was banned as of May from every reservation in the state.
Christy Nome has been banned from every reservation. That's awesome. Yeah. That's great. That should happen more.
Yeah, there was this period where I was kind of wondering if tribes outside of South Dakota were going to start banning her just for the heck of it.
That'd be awesome. And, I hope it happens.
Well, she's going to be Secretary of Homeland Security now, so.
Oh, great. Good.
Yeah,
cool.
She will no longer be the governor banned from all the reservations. She will be
the Secretary of Security that's banned from all the reservations. So.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Hey, thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you like what you heard, make sure to leave a review on Apple Podcasts. It really helps out with the algorithm. And if you really like what you heard, consider supporting the show on Patreon. And hey, speaking of that, one of the benefits that you get for supporting this show on Patreon is you get your name read out at the end of every episode. So, without further ado, this episode was brought to you by our lovely patrons who include I Drink Corn Syrup, Yum, I Am Once Again, Leo Zachary Dickinson, Philip Cozy, Vita Breva, 2007 Kristen Rock, Aaron Thompson, Attention Francis, Derek Hale, Gavin Aronson, Joseph Gross, Kyle Gannis, Metric Conversion, Mitchell McKinley, Moss, Nathan Thiessen, Rayscar, Regular Sized Horse, parentheses, Small, Robert Eilman, Stephen aka Spike Stonehand, The Worst of All Possible Worlds, Vicky Sutton, Yeens, and of course, Chris Barker. And I will see you all next time.